It's a pleasure to be with you today. My name is Anna McGovern. I am the managing director of Pondview Consulting, which is my own supply chain and procurement advisory practice that I've been working in for about 5 years now. I want to thank Adriana for inviting me to speak to all of you. And the topic that we're going to cover today is anti-fragile supply chains, the CFO's best friend. I do a lot of technical coaching for clients. I coach a lot of supply chain professionals. And the thing I always tell them is, your title in the HR record may say you're a supply chain director, supply chain manager, but I'm here to tell you you're actually a finance director. So there is a huge synchronicity here between supply chain procurement and the finance profession, and together we deliver, the business results. So, we're going to talk a little bit about all of the relationships today. I'm going to go through a few slides to demonstrate the point, but I do want it to be interactive. If there is a question, please feel free to post it, and I'll count on Adriana to bring it up. But we can answer questions as you have them. So really, I'm here to tell you that anti-fragile supply chains are the key to unlocking higher ROIC and lowering earnings volatility. So let's get it started. First of all, why should you listen to me? The reason you should listen to me is because I've been delivering cash margin and stability through the supply chain function for the last 30 plus years. Just some metrics, a couple of key results that I've delivered just in the last couple of years. So I took one client from 41% gross margin through to 52% gross margin by working on their supply chain and procurement areas. Delivered a $12 million savings on $130 million spend in direct materials with a client in basically a 1 year period, and worked with another client to unlock 20% reduction in working capital. And how have I done this? This is just a snapshot. What I want you to take away from this is that I've been in the profession working on delivering growth and EBITDA for the last 30 plus years. Some of the places I've been are Spartech, which was an industrial plastics manufacturer. I spent the bulk of my career at Unilever. 23 years of my career have been spent at Unilever. I've worked in the beauty industry, in the nonprofit, and for the last 5 years, I've been running my own business. What I want you to take away from this slide is this: that at every stage of my career, I've basically advanced one mission, and that's to elevate supply chain from a cost center into a strategic driver of financial resilience, cash flow, and growth. It's what I've prided myself in for the last 3 decades or so. So those 3 decades were basically 30 years in the making to write Anti-Fragile Supply Chains. I published the book back in March of this year, and it's essentially, how we deliver um, better strategy, stronger partnerships by looking at anti-fragile supply chains. And I cover 5 key concepts. The concept of optionality, basically diversifying our supplier base, strengthening supplier relationships. Basically, they are the impetus to helping us deliver revenue, not just cost savings, but they help us deliver revenue through supplier-led innovation. Covers predictive analytics, the power of predictive insights through the power of AI is something we cannot escape any longer. And it talks a lot about inventory design and the cash conversion cycle of days inventory outstanding, days sales outstanding, days payable outstanding. So looking at all of those things to increase the conversion cash cycle. And finally, it's about supply chain end-to-end visibility from the customer all the way to our suppliers and their suppliers, because we're talking about an ecosystem of trying to deliver value here. So let's get into it. How do anti-fragile supply chains drive financial performance? Essentially, um, anti-fragile supply chains are about reducing earnings volatility. So this is about protecting EBITDA from external shocks. Think pandemic, which is the easiest one to think about. Think about the war in Ukraine. Think about the tariffs that everybody keeps talking about now for the last 10 months. Tariffs, tariffs, tariffs. All of these things shock the system. And by increasing our supplier base, right, by diversifying our supplier base, we can protect EBITDA and continue the momentum of receiving inbound materials. It's also about expanding margins through cost transparency. So it's about using advanced analytics and creating the should cost models and identifying what are the key cost drivers, where are the areas of waste that we need to focus on. How do we improve our working relationships, either internally or externally with our customers and our suppliers, to unlock 3 to 5% of annual savings every year without having to sacrifice inventory? So this kind of cost transparency, by having this open book costing with our supply base, helps us to improve gross margin and deliver a much cleaner ROIC. And again, it's about accelerating cash conversion, right? So the shorter the cash conversion cycle, the more free cash flow that we have. And all of those things are a result of having anti-fragile supply chains. What does anti-fragile means? It means these are supply chains that don't break. Fragile supply chains break. So anti-fragile ones are about the next step after resilience, right? So basically, when you have a disruption, the idea is how quickly can you respond, right? How quickly can you respond? The second step, I call it the 3 R's. So respond. The second R is recover. How long will it take me? So something breaks, the world blows up. I'm now, in a deficit in terms of supplying my customers. How long is it going to take me to recover from that event? And the last R is about renewing the processes and looking at continuous improvement. And therefore, that renew process is going from resilience to anti-fragility. And anti-fragility is about being able to thrive despite disruption. Because let's face it, disruption is no longer a one-off event, right? Disruption is all about, how do I thrive at all times? How do I succeed despite the disruptions? There are 6 levers of anti-fragility. Okay. And once again, I want to remind you, if there is any question, please feel free to ask. I'll count on Adriana to alert us. There are 6 levers where supply chains create financial upside, right? The first one is data. Okay. Like, we talk about cash is king. These days, the new currency is data, because it leads to speed of decision making, right? So the faster we can make decisions that are fact based, the more we can reduce forecast error, the more we can, contain fluctuations in working capital. So it's really about leveraging data to quickly make decisions. The second lever is supplier diversity and hedging your bets when it comes to risk. Because if you've got multiple qualified sources, you lower volatility, and you lower your supply risk. Supplier A just had a fire in their main factory that supplies you. Well, you're going to go to supplier B, okay, as your alternate. So it's about doing that risk mitigation exercise of understanding and mapping your supply chain from, protecting 80% of your revenue, let's say, taking those SKUs and mapping it all the way back, and discounts for services. It's really about understanding the risk profile for 80% of your revenue, understanding what you need to do to protect that. Having flexibility in terms of a variable cost structure. So basically, especially in manufacturing, you want to have flexibility, you want to have agility. I'll give you a great example from COVID. It's one of my favorite examples. King Arthur flour. A lot of you guys probably know King Arthur. Most of us who were staying at home started to take up baking, right? And King Arthur made most of their products in 50-pound sacks that were going to food service organizations, to cafeterias and restaurants and so on. Well, guess what? Nobody was eating out. They didn't need that industrial capacity. What they needed to make was more 10-pound and 5-pound bags of flour because everybody was baking at home. So they immediately changed over the lines. They invested a little bit of capital, bought change parts that allowed them to convert their industrial size lines into smaller home-based lines. And they were able to recoup revenue right away because they exercised that flexibility in their manufacturing process. So any questions so far? I want to make sure we're not ignoring anyone. Okay. Collaboration is really the key. I mean, this is not any kind of rocket science. It's about how do we play nicely in the sandbox together. It's really about all cross-functional teams working together in a proper integrated business planning process. Used to be called S&OP. That's the tactical piece of collaboration. The strategic piece is really aligning on a business plan, right? So you've got a 3-year strategic plan that morphs into an annual plan, and each of our functional leads, are responsible for delivering that plan. It also includes your suppliers, right? They are part of the team. They need to be sitting at the table because they're critical in delivering your plan. So this is an incredible piece of importance. I'll tell you, I wrote a blog showing how, and this isn't a political statement, but I was watching a documentary on what went wrong in terms of the government agencies that led to 9/11. We had all of the information that could have prevented the attack, according to this documentary. And what was happening is that the intergovernmental agencies were just simply working in silos. They were not communicating. Had they been doing the proper handoffs and handing the baton properly and not letting go until the other group took it on, we may have prevented 9/11 from happening. So the implication in supply chain and the implication for businesses is the importance of shoring up the interfaces, right? And that's where the collaboration takes place. Visibility is critical. This gets back to real-time data. Visibility is going to help us with inventory optimization and shorter cash conversion cycles. It's really important that we have that view globally. We want to be able to helicopter in. Many companies these days are calling it the control tower. So we want to have a control tower view of the entire operation so we can see where the opportunities are to eliminate waste. And then the biggest one is about innovation. I've never heard of an organization saving its way to growth. It just doesn't happen. If you don't have revenue generation, gross margin expansion, you're not going to be a successful business. And that comes from innovating. And who's the biggest source of innovation? It's not within. You got to look to the outside and bring it in. And this is where you have the biggest opportunity to have your suppliers bring you their innovations. Two of my favorite stories, classics. How many of you drink coffee using a K cup, a Keurig K cup? Right. How many of you have a Swiffer in your house? Okay, so those are both supplier-led innovations. All right. Swiffer was able to recreate the way we clean homes, right? Like the way we clean, they created a different category within household cleaning. And Keurig was the actual technology, and Green Mountain Coffee was the brand. They invented the K cup and they redefined how we consume coffee. Now, innovation is not invention. They didn't invent coffee, but they innovated the way we drink coffee. So, innovation is taking something that's been invented and making it oh so much better. So, this is why innovation is so critical. Now, how does procurement, I wrote another blog recently called Procurement is no longer the bridesmaid, it's the bride, right? Procurement became a strategic function. It's always been. I've been operating from a strategic point of view in procurement for the last 25 years, but suddenly it's fashionable, right? Within the last 5 years, since the pandemic, everybody is like pounding on procurement to help save them. Go to the suppliers. I don't have inventory. Go beat up on the suppliers. So suddenly procurement has a seat at the table. They're wearing the white dress. They're no longer the bridesmaid. They are sitting front and center, at the table. And so why do finance leaders, why do CFOs love procurement? Well, because they're the ones that are pulling the purse strings for them. So, I mean, essentially, here's the situation. You're facing a problem where you've got a lot of volatility. Think tariffs, think inflation, right? Think, duties. We don't know where we're going to get stuff from. So, volatility absolutely destroys margin and cash. So the solution that procurement brings is that they're actually de-risking your supply chain by creating the cost models, and they're creating the strategic relationships with the strategic partners that are going to help enable inbound materials so that you can continue to ship essentially. Um, and then what are the benefits of working closely with suppliers? Well, I mean, it's really about protecting your margins because you're constantly looking at that open book costing and you're agreeing you want to pay a fair margin to your suppliers. Believe me, they've got more power than the customer these days. There are suppliers that fire their customers nowadays. It's no longer I'm the customer, so I'm right. This is truly about they've got as much a voice sitting at the table as the customer does. So it's also about the cash. It's most chief procurement officers these days are not just being charged with delivering cost savings, they're actually being charged with delivering cash savings. How are you going to increase your payables, your days outstanding? How are you going to generate cash savings through factoring and through other financial instruments? It's like becoming quite a sophisticated game nowadays. And the approach that procurement takes is really fourfold. They're constantly assessing the current situation, the current supply markets. They're looking at their cost of goods. They're looking at their spend cube. What do I buy? Who do I buy it from? Where am I buying it from? What are the risks? They're constantly going through this iteration. And then they're aligning through a collaborative process. They align finance, operations, and the suppliers, and they've got shared KPIs so that everybody is singing off the same sheet of music. And then they're constantly optimizing, they're rationalizing, they're harmonizing the specifications, right? How do we consolidate volumes? How do we change material specs? If I've got a spec that's designed to get me on a rocket ship to the moon, but in terms of my use case, I only need a tricycle to get around the corner. Well, I mean, that's something that's over engineered, and procurement usually works with R&D to call something like that out. And then it's a continuous monitoring process so that you're constantly monitoring and governing and tracking the KPI, the key KPI, sorry, getting tongue tied there. So, and there's a governance model usually in place where you're looking at annual meetings at, top to top, in terms of the top to top meetings with your suppliers. There's steering committee meetings at like the VP levels, there's working team meetings at the director levels, and then the day-to-day operations. So multiple levels of governance to ensure this monitoring is taking place. Too many words, but let me give you some highlights. These are all sourced from, major consulting firms like McKinsey and Accenture and Gartner and Deloitte. I just want to show you the risks of supply chain disruption. And these are, basically coming out of the CPO surveys from last year, and they're from reports that were published earlier this year. So basically, what it's telling us is that supply chain disruption has, basically 38% year on year. So 2025 versus 2024, there were 38% more supply chain disruptions. A lot of it had to do with the administration's tariff policies. What are we going to do? Lost supply chain disruptions have cost us about 6 to 10% of revenue. Missed revenue growth, so opportunity costs, right, of not selling stuff because of disruption was anywhere from 8 to 10%, 8 to 11% of the top line. And then lost revenue, and this was from a study on small and medium-sized businesses, lost revenue because they could not get inventory due to delays or they didn't have the right policies in place was 15%. And so who are succeeding? Okay. I mean, essentially the companies that are investing in predictive analytics and supplier diversification have reduced their risk by 15%. Firms that are doing these things and assessing risk on a continual basis saw a 40% in EBITDA lift, right? Growth resilience. So, in other words, when I talk about despite the disruption, you're going to be the first to succeed because of those 3 R's, respond quickly, recover quickly, and then renew your process to shore it up so that your process doesn't break. Those people that are doing this continually saw 25% in their resilience, growth in their resilience, their ability to respond ahead of their competition. And then finally, cost reduction, right? So this constant evaluation, you're looking at the value chain and you can see all of the cracks and the waste, and you can like pinpoint the waste and eliminate it. And so that led to 10% or more cost reduction.
Anna, we have a question from Chris, and then one from me, but I'll do Chris's first. It looks like it's 2 parts. What are your primary mechanisms to encourage supplier-funded innovation? And the second part is, does diversifying your supplier chain provide a disincentive for a supplier to innovate, given the lack of exclusivity?
So we can talk a little bit, and Chris, feel free to reach out to me more offline. But in a nutshell, one of the key functions that professional procurement people do is they basically classify their key materials in a 4-box matrix. It's called the Kralik matrix. I don't know if you've heard of it, but you're not going to be looking at, innovation from Staples, who's supplying your office supplies, or Granger, who's supplying your MRO. You are going to be working with your most strategic suppliers. I mean, typically it's the old 80/20 rule, right? 80% of your spend is going to be with like your top 5 or 10 most strategic suppliers. The idea here is that these are suppliers that are invested in your growth. They're going to invest so that there's mutual growth. And it's going to be for your most strategic suppliers and your most strategic materials, right? So when you think about who I'm going to work with, it's, where I have high impact to my business and I have low, um, low opportunities to source it from others. Something like office supplies are going to be lower left box. Okay. It's low impact, typically lower spend. So this is how you're going to choose who your suppliers are going to be. Now, it's about resilience and it's about supply continuity. 30 years ago, when we were offshoring everything to China, it was really about low cost, low cost, low cost. So consolidate my spend, develop economies of scale, reduce from 100 suppliers to 3. That was the strategy that we played for a long time. And then suddenly, when the pandemic hit, everything changed. Everything changed overnight. It no longer was about low cost supply chains, it was about supply security. So it was much more important to protect the opportunity cost of a lost sale than it is to protect the cost of a material in the cost of goods line, right? So everybody understands supply, continuity, and so suppliers know that you're going to have a primary supplier and you're going to have a challenger, right? And they understand that. Okay, but then how do they grow? And it really becomes an art form. It becomes an art form of keeping the suppliers happy and developing them so that they can grow with you based on different pieces of business. You give them opportunities to grow their spend with you, but they could still not be the primary supplier. So it's a lot of dialogue, and the critical piece that AI will never replace is the relationship building. We still need humans and human intelligence to guard against how you build relationships where it's about human connection and emotional connection. Does that answer the question for you, Chris?
You can unmute, Chris.
Yes, it does. That's very insightful. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
And I looked up the matrix, so that's
okay.
a useful tool for me to.
Terrific.
Yeah.
Terrific. And Adriana, was there a second question?
Yeah, actually, it was from me, and it was more of a general thing. Like, as you work with clients, is there like a recurring theme of missteps that you've noted that are pretty common, along the way? Like,
Yeah. It's interesting because when you think about businesses, right, and where CEOs come from or people in the C-suite come from, for the longest time, marketing was the sexy place to come from, right? They are the divas on the stage. Finance, right? Like the CFO suite, many CFOs are becoming CEOs, right? So they're the divas on the stage. Very rarely, was supply chain recognized this way. And they were more of a support function, right? They were more of a support function. They were a cost center. They were not a profit center. Well, over the last, 30 plus years, that's started to change. And especially that's gotten accelerated. So like the designer, like the beautiful companies, right? Like the A companies such as Apple and, Amazon and, all of the masters, McDonald's, Unilever. I'm proud to say I work for one of the masters. These guys have been defining the value of supply chain for the last 30 plus years. And it started, with Procter and Gamble working with Walmart on everyday low pricing. This is why, for those of you that are of a certain age, there's no such thing as Kmart anymore. There's no such thing as Caldor anymore. No Borders, no Sears. I mean, my gosh, Sears like breaks my heart because that was the original Amazon. How many of us like remember the Sears catalog? Well, that's because they had broken supply chains, right? And Apple, was one of the first ones. Toyota was one of the first ones to recognize the importance of supply chain. So now what's happening is that the supply chain is sitting at the table because they need to speak the language of the business, right? So I can't speak Japanese when everybody else is speaking English. So when I teach my clients about why they can't make a business case, that's because they don't know how to talk to a finance person. They're not speaking. I mean, look at my presentation here. This is a supply chain presentation, but look at what I talk about. I'm talking about growth and gross margin and EBITDA and cash conversion cycle. This isn't meant for you guys only. This is really the language of the business. And this is why I tease my coachees, like, the people that I coach. I tell them, you're a finance manager. That is what our job is. And we need to be able to speak the language of the business. So the common theme, in the last 12 months, I've been focused a lot on procurement simply because that's where the demand has come from, right? With my clients. And here's the one thing that I've been asked. Okay, I've delivered 6 workshops and I'm working on a workshop to deliver next week in New Jersey for a client. What they ask me is, Anna, can you help us professionalize procurement? And the second thing they say is, can you teach our procurement teams how to speak to stakeholders? So I'm like teaching a new language. Like, I don't know if there's like an app for that. I'm like teaching the financials, to procurement people. So that's like a key theme that's coming up all the time. I would say the rest of the supply chain is more in line with speaking the language of the business.
Mhm.
Okay. Any other questions before we move on?
Nope, not yet.
Okay, great. So how do we erode value, okay, in the supply chain? So these are some of the areas, like same things are both the levers to create value, but they're also the same levers to erode value. So risk, okay? So disruptions from geopolitics and climate events, they cause volatility, and volatility creates margin erosion, increased cost of capital, right? If I swing over to the right, technology. I mean, I don't know about you, but like, every time I get comfortable with, a piece of technology, 10 minutes later, it's going to change. So that's creating a bunch of underutilized CapEx and a bunch of digital costs. So everybody talks about, AI and I need to invest in AI. The truth is, most businesses are not quite ready. In fact, there's a very important study that just came out recently by MIT. I'm sure some of you already know about it. I mean, they're creating quite a buzz because what they have pointed to is that 95% of AI implementations are failing. And that's because people are focused on the shiny new toy. They're not focused on people and process first. Visibility, right? Lack of it. Poor real-time data leads to missed demand signals, which is going to increase inventory. It's going to increase your days inventory outstanding. It's going to tie up cash and obsolete and slow-moving goods. Collaboration. If you're working in silos, especially if you're in finance and ops, You're going to increase forecast variance. You're going to lower your service levels, and you're going to have major working capital swings. Costs. Okay, so again, inflation, logistics. If you're not planning your logistics network properly, you're going to have a bunch of, transshipments. They're going to create unnecessary cost. You've seen energy costs go up and down and up and down. All of this is putting pressure on EBITDA. So inflation is putting pressure on, purchase price variance, which is lowering your GM. Talent. Okay. I mean, so many of us, people talk about, I can't find jobs. And yet there are so many open roles because we don't have the right talent that's got the right skill set. So skilled labor shortages, will delay decision making, which leads to productivity losses, higher SG&A on a per unit basis. And then finally, sustainability is something that is not just about CSR, right? ESG rules require supplier transparency. If you have any interest in dealing with California or Europe, you better get on the bandwagon, right? So that's one of the other areas that's really driving value erosion if you can't get it right. So how do we go from resilience to ROI? So what's the anti-fragile, playbook? I mean, I'm summarizing this for you because I've harped on them throughout my discussion, right? It's all about diversified sourcing. So not having all your eggs in one basket, making sure that you've lowered your risk by having multiple sources and having redundancy so that something blows up, you've got options. Agile planning, right? So this is about that, decision making, speed to decisions by having a business team aligned around integrated business planning and a proper sales and operations planning process. It improves your forecast accuracy and your inventory turns. So it's going to mean lower capital, more cash flow. Data and predictive analytics, right? So, I mean, it's becoming redundant, but you can't just say, okay, I'm going to implement new tools, I'm going to implement new AI. It has to start with the users. It's got to have a proper definition about what problem am I willing to solve? What problem can I solve? What do I have to solve? And it's like I had a client who was an energy, they were in energy, gas, and chemicals, and they wanted to upgrade their ERP system. They were on an old instance of Blue Yonder, which was JDA at one point. It's now Blue Yonder. And they wanted they got infatuated with looking at things like Kinaxis and O9, which are, the high-end predictive analytics planning tools for those of you that are familiar with them. But I basically told them they're not ready. They just were not ready. So essentially the analogy I made to them, I was like, hey, you're driving a 2000 Ford Focus and you want to jump into a 2025 Tesla. How about you jump into a Toyota first? It's still an upgrade, but you're just not ready for all these bells and whistles. You need to be cognizant of your user, change fatigue. Are the users ready to adopt these high-end tools? That's the key lesson here about predictive analytics and using those tools. But essentially, when you use them the right way, it will reduce your forecast error. It will increase your cash forecasting accuracy, and it's going to increase your service levels. No question about it. And then the last piece of the puzzle is supplier collaboration. This is about partnering for innovation. Who's going to give me the next Swiffer? Who's going to give me the next K-Cup? Right? And it's about risk sharing and service improvement together. You're invested. You both have skin in the game. And that's the key unlock here. They know you're going to give them volume. They know you're both investing in each other's future. And it's about, creating top line growth. This is how they help you grow the top line, not just increase EBITDA, right? So it's about margin accretion and revenue growth. I'll stop to see if there's any questions.
Chat. Yep. Okay, so I don't know if it's a question or a comment. An org has to be ready to embed tech and tools into the workflow and to improve it. That was from Shupo. Did I say that name right?
Yes, you did. Thank you.
Okay, and you can elaborate if you need to.
Well, basically, the point is that if an organization is not ready, essentially, to embed or apply new tools, it won't work because there's no acceptance of it, right? So there are two things then, how ready is the organization, and can the tools actually seamlessly work into the workflow without disrupting existing current processes tremendously, especially for small and medium-sized businesses that don't have deep pockets, that it can be,
Yeah.
it is acceptable, and therefore ultimately benefits to the ROI.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for the question. 1000%. If the organization is not ready, if the user base is not ready, if there isn't executive sponsorship of an initiative like that, it will 100% fail. It's all about change management. It doesn't matter what shiny toy you want to implement, and I don't have a preference. I'm agnostic, I mean, yes, there are certain platforms that are more suited, to certain industries or certain, manufacturing, like industrial versus, consumer or something along those lines, but it doesn't matter. They're all a bunch of computers that are waiting for humans to define the problem and ask the right questions. So if our user community doesn't have the stomach, if our executive team isn't invested in the change and isn't willing to sponsor the change, it will fail. The initiative will fail. So organizational readiness is exactly the right thing to think about. So this is what I was telling you about my energy company. They were not ready for all the bells and whistles, right? And it would have meant a $10 million capex where a simple upgrade would have been a $2 million investment, right? And they needed to speak the language of the business, right? They needed to show, the discounted cash flows and get the proper ROI for the project. They wouldn't have gotten the ROI if they decided to go with a $10 million shiny new toy that nobody was ready for.
Right.
So clearly you got to assess, right? But at the same time, I've got so many clients that are limping along because they've got disintegrated systems all over the place. Legacy systems, or through mergers and acquisitions, they integrate, but they never integrate the system. So this is a big problem, especially in the mid-market area, private equity owned businesses especially.
Sam Kung has asked, as a finance leader, how would I partner with procurement to put your ideas into action?
Yeah. So it's got to be a two-way relationship, right? It starts with the business goals, right? So whether you're in finance, procurement, whether you're in marketing, sales, it has to start with aligned business goals. Here is the business plan. This is what we need to deliver. So then it's sort of like, we're in the middle of baseball playoffs, right? So, each of these teams has one goal in mind. They want to win the World Series. But it takes 9 guys on the field in order to win right? And everyone has a role. So this is about the collaboration, about what are the shared business goals. It should be one business goal, and each of us, as we start to drill down, so think about it. Strategic plan defines a business plan. A business plan then is turned into a supply chain plan, an R&D plan, right? And you know, the supply chain plan has a manufacturing and production plan and a procurement and materials plan. So everything is sort of like drilling down, and everything that we're doing in each of our, you know, cross-functional areas has to ladder up to the delivery of the business plan. You know, if the plan says, you know, we're going to grow market share, which to me is the ultimate you know, KPI. How are we going to grow market share? Well, we're going to have superior customer service delivery. We're going to have, you know, efficient working capital by having, you know, increased inventory turns. So this is the finance community is basically monitoring and defining the KPIs, right? And procurement has to be aligned to that. Did that answer the question for you?
Sam, did that do it?
Sorry, I was on mute.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, I'm just trying to think practically, right?
Mm-hmm.
What could I actually do? I mean, I guess talking to them helps. I guess aligning the business, but I mean, I'm
So
trying to think.
what role do you have today, Sam?
Well, I'm just thinking theoretically in terms of, don't have a role right now, but if I were
Okay.
to try to sell in, what would be my pitch?
Okay. So the pitch would be, you know, so the conversation is, how do we get more? So this is procurement and finance talking. I need to increase revenue by 10%. This is the finance person talking. You know what? Next quarter, we're running short. We need to increase revenue in the second half of the year by 10%. And I also need, you know, my costs are high because of purchase price variance due to inflation, and I need to somehow find another 5% in cost savings. That's the problem statement. Okay, so now you, as the procurement person, you're going to say, okay, let me see what I can do. And you're going to talk to your strategic partners, right? And you're going to bring them to the table. You're going to define the business challenge to your supply base, and you're going to give them skin in the game. Hey, you know, here's my problem. Here's my dilemma. You know, my finance director just asked for this. And the reason we need to deliver this, not because we're just greedy, but because I need to reinvest in the business so that we can grow the top line and invest behind this new product line. And this new product line means that it's potential growth for you. I mean, I'm making things up. I'm just painting a picture for you about how you align everybody around a business goal. Finance needs X, and procurement is going to help deliver X through supplier incentives, you know, through, hey, Mr. Supplier, you've got an opportunity to grow your volume. You've got an opportunity at volume stability and sales stability over 3 years. If you reduce my costs or give me rebates, I'm going to give you guaranteed volumes of between X and Y for the next 3 years. I'm going to sign a 3-year contract with you that gives you cash flow stability, right? That's one of the strategies that you could potentially open up. And this is a day-to-day operational conversation. This isn't at, like, you know, the high echelons of the company. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay, great. Any other questions?
Nope, not yet.
Okay. So I was asked before the start of the session whether I'm going to share the slides, and I will share these slides with the group. So I'm not going to get into all of this, but this is how collaborative procurement. So Sam's question is exactly what we just went over with the example. these are, the 8 points of how procurement can turn supplier partnerships into EBITDA. So aligning strategically with them. First of all, aligning with the business. So finance says, here's what I need. Procurement says to the supplier partner, this is what I need from you. Then it's about, the process integration around, what do we need to do to deliver best forecast and inventory optimization, the technology enablement, so that we can see what the cost to serve model is going to look like, through technology, the data and analytics, the risk management, the performance metrics. I don't want to get into all of these in the interest of time, to see maybe if we have one or two more questions. But I mean, this is pretty basic and you'll get it in the deck. Finally, this is a case study out of my book, Antifragile Supply Chains. It's one of the ones that I talk about, where we had a major problem. So a Category 4 hurricane struck the Gulf Coast, disrupting operations of surfactants, which are basically chemical-based cleansing agents, and high-density polyethylene bottles. So major supply disruption. Right? There was no buffer stock. There was no supplier redundancy, right? 70% of the revenue was based on 5 SKUs. Talk about the 80-20 rule. And the contract manufacturers were unable to pivot. Like, we were going to be out of stock. We were looking at like an out of stock situation for 3 months. So the solution was to quickly qualify. And part of it was working very closely with R&D. And remember that, that scenario I was pointing to earlier when I said, when we over-spec materials, we were able to loosen up the spec a little bit, where it wasn't perfect. It was good enough to get the job done, to shore up, the supply for a little while. So we were within 2 weeks able to qualify new suppliers and new specs. And we built a real-time supplier risk dashboard. We had basically a SWAT team. We had like a tiger team in place where we're meeting daily, right? And putting stuff in place to track the weather situation, the whole situation. So, and then we used the supplier to help ramp up based on their schedule. So we gave them the responsibility of building the inventory for us, because they knew our business better than we did, at some point. So essentially, we were able to recover within 4 weeks. And we were able to get back to 90% case fill versus the normal 98. But we were in the 70s. That's how bad it was. And then we saved $8 million. Like, we were able to cut down that time. So the revenue lost, we were able to reduce it by 8 million. And by reducing the risk and going to different suppliers, we were able to find, some suppliers who were interested in winning business. We got 20% savings. So it was a bad situation that created some positives. So this was, a situation where stuff happens, right? Stuff is going to happen every day. And so the idea is, how quickly can I respond with agility? How quickly and how easily can I react? And finally, this is really my last slide in terms of content. It's about, where are the future trends going? Clearly, it's technology. I mean, so since last year, CEOs, CFOs, and CPOs, Chief Procurement Officers, have been talking about the need to invest in digital and talent who can manage digital. So that started already. The piece about collaboration, we know without it, we're not going to survive, right? It's absolutely, and this is about collaborating in the ecosystem, not just insular within our 4 walls. Sustainability is not going away, right? Especially like with millennials and Gen Z, they pay attention. They're reading the back of labels. They want to do good for the environment. They want to do good from a sustainability perspective. And let me tell you something, doing good is actually good for business. So if you embrace it, you're going to grow faster than the competition. Agility, I've beat it to death. Okay. So, I mean, this is the number one tool for a CFO, right? This is where they have options and they're going to be able to pull the different levers. Resilience, companies need to be able to quantify disruption and what it means to ROI. How fast can I respond? And there's a way to quantify that in terms of actual ROI. And innovation, we've talked about it. It's you leverage your suppliers to help you grow your top line. And then finally, it really takes a special leader these days. Because, nowadays you've got 5 generations that are all working at the same time. And I was like, 5 generations? Who's the 5th generation? Believe it or not, the silent generation, which is older than the boomers, people are still working well into their 80s. And think about it, we're living a lot longer. We're living a lot longer. So, how do you manage boomers and Gen X and millennials and Gen Z? And now you got Gen Alpha coming in. How do you manage all these people and their very specific needs at the same time? So, that's going to be the differentiator. Leaders that know how to leverage the best of their people. And now, I mean, I was talking about who gets to the top. I talked about marketing and finance and supply chain. The people that are getting to the top next are chief HR officers, because it really is about human capital at the end of the day, right? So that is the last of my slides. I do want to deliver a little plug for myself. If you want to learn more, again, out of necessity and out of market demand, I've recently created 2 offerings. I do a lot of custom coaching for clients, but I told you guys about this thing about Anna help us professionalize procurement and help us speak the language of the business. I've created this from cost to growth, the procurement transformation academy, and the procurement power hour, where people can go on to my website and book, micro coaching time. So I've given you the links here. Would appreciate it if you can visit my website, pondviewconsulting.com, and check these out and pass it along to people who could benefit. And with that, I want to thank you for your attention.